on over.
So good morning, Columbus. It's an honor to be here, and I wish we could be here under better circumstances, but you know, as somebody that was born in 1978, I'm the first person in my family born with all of my rights because of many of the people in this room and the work that you did. But it's incumbent upon us to not be the last person born with all of our rights. So as I was introduced, I'm Attorney Gerald Griggs. I'm the 13th president of the Georgia State Conference of the NAACP. But more importantly, I am a son of Georgia, which is why when Major Turner said, could you come to Columbus, it was no thought. I get in my car and drive an hour and a half from Atlanta because all Georgia cities are connected. So if something happens in Columbus, it happens in Atlanta. Amen. You know, last week we were down in Camden County, which is about 4.5, almost 5 hours from Atlanta, and we were down there for Juneteenth to celebrate freedom. And I started the conversation in the place where freedom started. You know, last week we were talking about Galveston, but how many know about Special Order 15 that was given in Savannah?
Say it.
So I'm gonna give you a little bit of history, and then we're gonna talk about what happened at the Supreme Court a few weeks ago. So many people know the special place that Georgia has in the liberation struggle. It started when a general decided to march through Georgia after burning Atlanta to the ground, and he marched to the sea. His name was William Tecumseh Sherman. And when he got to Savannah, he issued a special order. Now this is 6 months before Galveston, but it's still 1865. And that special order came after a group of pastors got together and met at First African Baptist Church, which is one of the oldest churches in North America. And when they got to First Baptist, William Tecumseh Sherman and the Secretary of War, Mr. Stewart, asked the black folks, what is it that y'all want? And they told them they wanted land. And that was the genesis of something I know everybody in this room knows about, 40 acres and a mule. So that was born in Savannah. And let me be clear about something. They got the 40 acres and they got a mule. Guess what the 40 acres and the mule were? It was the coastland from Charleston to the St. Johns River. All of that coastland, the Golden Isle, Sea Island, Sapelo, Jekyll, Charleston, all of that was given to the slaves. 400,000 acres. But guess what happened after that? There was a deal to pull the troops out of the South, and Reconstruction ended, and Jim Crow began. And so it's incumbent upon what Major Turner has convened us to have a real conversation about what Jim Crow 3.0 looks like. Because it's not 2.0. We in 3.0. And so as I think about what our ancestors achieved 151 years ago, we have to be focused on what we will pass on to our descendants 151 years to come. And so that brings me to Louisiana versus Calais. To give you some historical context, the Louisiana State Conference, as well as other state conferences around the South, once we had our 2020 census, people started to redistrict. And so the State Conference of Louisiana, when I say the State Conference, I mean the NAACP, filed a lawsuit after the state of Louisiana gerrymandered the state. And they were successful in carving out another majority-minority district, similar to what happened in Alabama, similar to what was attempted to happen in Georgia by the Georgia NAACP, in Tennessee, and South Carolina, and Florida. Why is this important? Well, it's important because the state of Louisiana challenged it, some citizens, and it went all the way up to the Supreme Court. And a few weeks ago, the Supreme Court, after hearing the argument twice, issued a ruling. And that ruling attempted to gut the most consequential piece of legislation that many in this room fought for, that John Lewis fought for, that Dr. King fought for, and that was the Voting Rights Act. Now you have to remember that Shelby County versus Holder in 2012 gutted the pre-clearance section of the Voting Rights Act, which means that no longer the states have to go through a pre-clearance before implementing a law that has anything to do with voting. And so now they were coming after Section 2. Section 2 allows for private individuals and organizations, after the law has been passed, to bring a lawsuit to say this law that the state has put forward systemically disenfranchises black people. Well, the Supreme Court, in a 6-3 decision, made it harder for us to bring those claims. And so what does that mean? I know a lot of people are having a lot of conversation. We were talking about what this could mean to the South. And all of a sudden, after the decision, y'all saw a wave of redistricting throughout the South to remove the power of African Americans to have the representation of their choice. Columbus was about to be affected because we all know we sit in Sanford Bishop District. Is that Congressional District 2, right? Yeah. Okay. They were going to erase Congressional District 2 because of what the Supreme Court said. But because we are in the birthplace of civil rights, the birthplace of social justice, the birthplace of reparations, this state stood up. Now, Tennessee attempted to stand up. South Carolina did stand up. Florida, well, it's Florida. Alabama attempted to stand up. Louisiana attempted to stand up. But Georgia and South Carolina set the table. Because not only did we stand up, we sent a message. Because remember, Governor Kemp called a special session for the purpose of redistricting. It wasn't to do anything with ad valorem taxes or to do anything with voting rights bills. It was to redistrict. But thousands of black people and people of good conscience in Georgia decided to make their way down to the Capitol after voting on Tuesday. They showed up on Wednesday with a message. Now, if we remember, the vote on Tuesday didn't go the way a lot of people in Georgia thought they were going to go. Even though it was very low turnout, black people turned out and sent a message. And then they turned out and sent a message on Wednesday to the Gold Dome. And of course, they decided not to redistrict, but to put it off. So back to the Supreme Court decision. What does it mean for us? It means that we have to be more intentional in showing up in spaces like this. Yep. It means that we have to educate our young people that they are on the menu, period, full stop. And that we have to be intentional with the same resolve as our ancestors to fight, to win, and to document. Now, I think the biggest thing that we have done in my generation is a disservice to the next generation. You know, your generation taught us to go to school, to get a good education, to get a good job. But you also didn't teach us the fight it took to get the opportunity to do that. My generation has been teaching our kids to go for the bag. Regardless of anything else, go get the bag. That stops. Because we have seen since the election of the first African-American president of the United States, a backlash. I'll call it a white lash. And we are doing a disservice to our children not to teach them the resolve of their ancestors. Yep. Our ancestors never stopped fighting. That's right. Never. In this state, they fought, and they continue to fight. And it's incumbent upon us to teach our young people that same fight. You know, I was driving down 185 and I was looking around, and then I got to Columbus and it started to feel like Metro Atlanta. Because once you get into Metro Atlanta, the expressway gets bigger, you start seeing the homes. But then I saw a sign that said Fort Benning. And I thought about it. I thought they changed the name of the fort because it was named after a Confederate general. But then I thought about it. This is how it starts. They changed the history. They banned the accurate teaching of the history. They attack your voting rights, which is your voice. They mass incarcerate you, and then they erase you. That's what we got to teach our children. Because if we teach our children who they really are, we won't have a problem with teaching them how to vote.
Come on.
We won't have a problem keeping them out of the mass incarceration industry. Oh, I forgot, that's the name of it. Some of y'all call it the criminal justice system. It's a mass incarceration system. Because the 13th Amendment, which comes before the 14th Amendment, says that slavery is outlawed except for conviction for a crime. So slavery never ended. It just changed its name. It's the same thing what's going on with our voting rights. Jim Crow didn't end. It just changed its name to James S. Crow, Esquire. And so that's why it's incumbent upon me and other lawyers like me to come into communities like this and have a frank and honest conversation about what it was going to take to stop this. Now let's circle back to what we were going to do on Wednesday before they waved the white flag. Because Louisiana versus Calais does not gut the Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. And I'm going to say that again, because there's a lot of lawyers running around here saying that it gutted the Voting Rights Act. It did not. It just made it a little bit harder to prove a racial discrimination in redistricting. So what were we going to do on Wednesday? We were going to make the record to show the racial animus of the redistricting. What does that mean? It means we were going to testify at the hearings the disproportionate effect of gutting this particular congressional district. We were going to have people come to the hearing to talk about how proud they were to elect a candidate of their choice, how they were able to raise their voice and send Sanford Bishop, who was and is a civil rights warrior, to Congress. You know, I remember the first time I met Representative Bishop, he reminded me that he grew up in NAACP in the 50s. So for Congress and for state legislatures to erase his district says they are taking aim on civil rights. And so we have to use the same strategy that Thurgood and Charles Hamilton Houston and all of the black lawyers who were in the background of the civil rights movement used to dismantle segregation, to dismantle James S. Crow, Esquire. You see where I'm going with this, y'all? So that's why we're here. This is a mass meeting. I'm gonna say that again. This is a mass meeting. And at the mass meeting, you convene, you give the historical context, you give marching orders, and then you give a charge to the people to convene again. Because what we do is we convene, we strategize, we win, we convene again. There's been a continuous cycle of convening in Georgia since 2016. I'm gonna remind you of some of the things that y'all have done in Georgia since 2016. So in 2018, we had a wave of voter engagement that shaped the course of American history. Then in 2020, we had a wave of civic engagement that reshaped Georgia history as we sent the first African American and the first Jewish congressman to Washington. And then we did it again in 2021. And then we did it again in 2022. And then we did it again in 2023. We did it again in 2024. But how is all this happening? Because we're convening. We're having a continuous mass meeting. And so when we talk about Louisiana versus Calais, the way we push back on that decision is we get better at organizing. One of the things that we are very good at, but we don't use it for good, is social media. Y'all asking, how do we get the attention of the young people? They all on social media. They TikToking, they Instagramming, they Snapchatting, they're dancing while history is being made. We got to remind them how they even got the right to dance in this particular time in history. And so what I wanted to leave with you guys in this conversation is everybody in there has a phone, right? When you get done with this meeting, we need to have a conversation on the phone, that we reach everybody, that we make sure everybody's registered, that we make sure everybody has a voter mobilization plan and that everybody gets out in Georgia in November, because we have an opportunity to do something. Remember what they said after Wednesday. They said, we're not going to redistrict right now.
But we coming back.
We coming back in November. And then our response was, well, we convened on Wednesday. We're going to convene when you come back, and we're going to convene at the polls in November. Because here's the thing. Louisiana versus Calais gives the state legislature the power to redistrict. But if we control the state legislature, who gonna do the redistricting? We will. See, here's the brilliance of our ancestors. They studied the system, they understood how the system worked, and then they used the system against the system. Yep. I'll give you an example. So Brown versus the Board of Education, which is Thurgood's seminal case. How did he convince a conservative court to care about black people's rights? He used testimony that showed the racial animus that separate was inherently not equal. He had school children come in for a test. He had one white doll, he had one black doll. And he systematically showed that the children picked the white doll, and he used that as evidence of the racial animus that was built into the system. Why am I telling y'all that? Because we were going to do the same thing with the testimony at the redistricting hearings to build a record to get back up to the Supreme Court. Again, y'all, this is the long game. We have to make sure we're prepared. That's why it's incumbent upon us to show up at the hearings. You guys just had a historic election, right? Y'all elected the first African-American mayor of Columbus. Congratulations. Amen. Y'all passed the first part of the test. But Mayor Hughley is gonna need y'all to do what? Show up at the the city council meetings so he can get his agenda passed. See, we're only doing the first step. We gotta continue, because civic engagement means that we are the ones that set the agenda. It's sort of like in 2008, when we sent Barack Obama to the White House, and then we just sat back for like 8 years. We didn't go and vote in the midterms to give him a Congress. We didn't allow him to get his administration and his priorities together. And then we wondered why we didn't get anything out of that. Because we didn't civically engage. And so what the lesson of Louisiana versus Calais is we have to stay civically engaged. Because let's be clear. Project 2025 is not new. It's actually 60 years old. From the point that the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act were passed, there was a plan to roll it back from then. Yep. This is the plan. Yep. But the great thing about our community is we knew the plan was coming. That's why y'all's generation told mine, go to school, get educated. But y'all forgot to tell us to bring that education back into the community and use it for good. Amen. Now we are doing that. So here's where we are. So now that Wednesday has happened and we are basking in a win, we have to remember that it's a temporary win. We have to remember that we have to engage, we have to organize, and we have to convene. That's why when Major Turner said, we're having a meeting in Columbus, I said, Dante said, and others said, this is the first meeting. It's not the last meeting. Because what we need to do is to continue to convene. Because remember, in 2020, we had record turnout because we were meeting weekly. There was folks knocking doors weekly. We were engaging the voters weekly. We were dispelling disinformation weekly. The disconnect in our community is we are not having a weekly family meeting to have these conversations. We can't just allow politicians to show up in our community once every 2 years or once every 4 years when we haven't met to discuss what are the initiatives that we want, what are the policy goals. You know, I was talking to Major Turner when I came down here, and I was driving down this street, and I was thinking, so why does this street look like this? Who was the last person to have a conversation with the policymakers who determined this street was going to have systemic disinvestment? Why are we not having those conversations? Because we're not having family meetings. What's happening in Columbus is happening in Atlanta. What's happening in Atlanta is happening in Valdosta. If we want our people to engage in the political conversation, we got to change the environment upon which they live. That's a policy decision by a policy maker. And so why are we having this conversation based on a Supreme Court case? Because this is how it starts. See, they believe that we will not be engaged in a political conversation. They believe for most of our community it's above their heads. It's not. They're literally having it by not coming to vote. You know, I go talk to community leaders, but I also go talk to the community. And I ask the 30% or the 40% or the 50% that are not engaged, why are they not voting? You know what the number one thing they tell me? Voting don't matter to me because it ain't changed nothing. So what do we have to do? We have to show them the change.
Yep, it's a win.
We got to make sure that they understood on Wednesday that didn't happen in a bubble. It happened because people organized. But now we're going to organize in your local community and hold your local officials accountable so that the next time we come down here, the street don't look like this. Because there's grant funding that's going up the street that's not coming here. Why are there not community block grants in this part of town? If you don't know what a community block grant is, holler at me after the meeting. Why are there not initiatives for black-owned businesses that are already here, like this beautiful building we're in right now? Shout out to the beautiful, illustrious owner of this who opened her doors. These are the conversations we got to have, and it starts with these cases. So I'm going to close with this, y'all. In order for us to get to the point where we can have a full-throated political conversation with our people, we have to meet them where they are. What does that mean? That means that when we leave this meeting, what happens at this meeting does not stay at this meeting.
Yep.
Let's be honest, y'all. When we go to family reunion, what happens at the family reunion don't stay at the family reunion. We tell everybody what Big Mama said. We tell everybody what that one niece who's doing exceptional work, going to Harvard, getting her degree, we tell everybody that. Why don't we do the same thing here? Because it's going to start with the household. We all know in the black community it starts with the household. Then it moves to where? The church. Then it moves from the church to what? The community center. And from the community center to the black-owned business. Why are we skipping steps? We can literally change history in November. I'm going to say something that I can now say because I'm no longer the state president. But let's be clear. If we flip some seats in November, we ain't got to worry about redistricting. If we send the first African American female to the governor's mansion, we don't have to worry about James S. Crow Esquire at all.
Nope.
But it's going to take us having a conversation about what real leadership does. And it's about us having a conversation with each candidate about the deliverables in the first 100 days.
Yep.
I said the first 100 days. Because one thing I know about black people, after you're elected, for them first 3 days, they're gonna be like, hey, so what did we get out of this? My community still look the same. Nothing has changed. The roads still got potholes. The schools still underfunded. That's a conversation we need to be having right now with our elected officials, because the governor of the state of Georgia has a lot of power. They can write an executive order right now to protect voting rights. Right now. Because the 10th Amendment says all powers not expressly given to the federal government go where? To the states. Wait, that sounds like states' rights, right? I'm gonna let you in a little secret. Since since about 80% of the African Americans all reside in the South, why don't we have a reverse Southern strategy that gives rights back to the states? And then take over the state legislatures, take over the governorships, and really have self-determination as a people. That's the conversation we need to be having with our people. And trust me, the light bulb will go off. When they start talking about, well, I can't get small business loans, the governor can do that. I can't get, funding for our educational system, the State House does that. We don't have to worry about Washington. And if we have a governor and a State House that has true power, the next time somebody calls into Georgia and says, just find me, how many votes? 11,780. We'll send that person to a Georgia prison.
That's right. Woo. All right now.
That's how this works. So let's act like we know the power that we have. Let's re-enfranchise our people to say this ain't 1850 and it's not 1950. It's 2026. Let's remind them that there are more Dr. Kings and Thurgoods and John Lewis and Ella Baker and Fannie Lou Hamer because they left a blueprint. And let's go get some historic wins like we did on Wednesday. I love the 60s. I love the 50s. But we've been winning in Georgia way before that and way after that. I'm gonna leave you with this. We went to Savannah about 2 months ago, and we went to the first African Baptist church. I suggest everybody takes their children to the first African Baptist church in Savannah. There are holes in the floor in the first African Baptist church in Savannah. You ask yourself why? Because it's the first stop on the Underground Railroad. Our children need to understand that there have been warriors in this state for well over 100 years. And they are expecting our children to be just as bold, just as courageous. Why do I bring that up? Because the first African American senator from the state of Georgia is from Savannah. There's a through line historically through Georgia. And it's because of work of the people in this room, the ones that organized, the ones that mobilized. Let's not stop that. So one Supreme Court case that did not gut the Voting Rights Act will not stop us, because we have the resolve of our ancestors and we have the ingenuity of that generation that came before us. I'm going to close with this, y'all. I am 48 years old. I have an 18-year-old. I have a 2-year-old. They are expecting us to be great ancestors to our descendants. What we do in this moment, 150 years from now, people will talk about. They don't want to hear about apathy. They don't want to hear about, well, I had to do this and that when our voting rights were at stake, when reproductive rights were at stake, when people were taking dead aim at black folks. What they want to hear is that we made history. History like Dr. King. History like Rosa Parks. History like John Lewis. What are we going to say we did when the orange Twitler took direct aim at Georgia? Because he's going to take direct aim at Georgia. But you know what I know we're going to say? We're going to do to him what we did to him the last time. We're going to lock him up in a Fulton County detention facility, and this time we're going to make sure that he understands that you don't mess with Georgia, otherwise Georgia will mess with you. And so I'm honored that Major Turner invited me. I hope we get to see Vigilante, where y'all can see they outline this plan. That's why I'm saying this is not Jim Crow 2.0, it's actually Jim Crow 3.0, but also how we organize with the lawyers to push back, to gut parts of SB 202, the voter suppression bill. How we fought back to re-register folks that were challenged and removed from the rolls, and how we can be successful moving forward. So I don't want to take any more of your time than this, but I also want to remind you that we will overcome, we have overcome, and we will spread this knowledge throughout Georgia of how we continue our victory. So it's been a pleasure. If y'all have any questions, I'll be here. But the last thing I want you to do after you leave here, after you leave the family reunion, the mass meeting, spread the word. A massive victory is coming in November in Georgia. All we have to do is get out and have a conversation with our people and hold elected officials accountable. Thank you.